The underestimated voice they saw a man without influence, a lone figure powerless against a system designed to crush him. But when Derek Langston entered that courtroom, armed with nothing but the unvarnished truth and an unyielding will, he didn't just challenge the opposition. He exposed a deep-seated fraud that left a powerful judge speechless and changed a community forever. Stick around as we unveil the reckoning they never anticipated. What you're about to witness is more than a story. It's a powerful chronicle of quiet resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice where it's least expected. If you're new here, we'd love for you to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if narratives like this one resonate with you, inspiring you to think and question, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. We're dedicated to sharing vital stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you for joining us. Now let's delve into the story. The weight of silence, the burden of silence was a familiar one to Derek Langston. He had first learned it as a boy, sitting at his grandmother's kitchen table in Birmingham, Alabama, watching her meticulously track expenses by the dim light of a single lamp. He knew it as a teenager, listening to her soft gospel tunes as unpaid bills mounted like inescapable walls. But he understood it completely the day she collapsed in that same kitchen, her chest tight as overdue notices trembled with her last breath. The silence that followed was not one of peace. It was the kind that screams from the depths of your soul, echoing the injustices the world seems determined to inflict. Now, under the harsh glare of the Fulton County Courthouse, Derek wore that silence like armor. His suit, alone, was ill-fitting and slightly frayed, his tie askew. Yet his hands were steady as he held his file and looked ahead. A low, skeptical hum filled the courtroom, a familiar sound reserved for the underdog about to face an impossible battle. Every eye was on him, questioning what chance a black man without counsel or legal training had against the formidable machinery of a corporate legal team. At the front, Judge Lawrence Carmichael, notorious for his impatience and thinly veiled disdain for self-represented litigants, looked down from his bench. With a dismissive air, he asked, "Mr. Langston, representing yourself today?" A knowing smirk played on his lips. Derek met his gaze firmly. "Yes, Your Honor." Across the aisle, Christopher Hale, a senior partner from a powerful real estate law firm, barely hid his own contempt. His designer suit seemed to radiate authority and privilege. He leaned over to his assistant, his voice just loud enough for Derek to hear. "This will be over before lunch." Derek heard the words, the same dismissive tone he'd faced from the bank, the mortgage officer, and the eviction notice. But he didn't flinch. His expression remained composed, his mind a steel trap. Let them underestimate him. 4 months, Derek had been preparing for this day, poring over legal texts, property records, and case precedents in late-night library sessions. He was fueled by the quiet rage of a man determined not to let his grandmother's home be stolen from under him. He was here to change the script, not follow it. A crack in the system when Judge Carmichael turned to Hale and said, "You may proceed." Hale's voice was smooth, confident. He spoke of contracts and missed deadlines, of the bank's irrefutable right to reclaim the property. It was a well-rehearsed performance, each word a step in tightening a noose. But as Hale spoke, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't in what he was saying but in Derek's unnerving calm. The silence was no longer of defeat, but of a storm-gathering force. When Hale finished, the judge turned to Derek, a hint of boredom in his voice. "Mr. Langston, your rebuttal." Derek stepped forward, his voice clear and resolute. "Your Honor, this is more than a simple contract dispute," he began, his gaze sweeping over the now curious faces in the gallery. "It's about a system designed to silence people like me with paperwork and protocol. I am here to prove that this foreclosure was built on manipulated documents and procedural violations." He unfolded his first piece of evidence. "I will demonstrate that the signatures on the mortgage were inconsistent, that the transfer of ownership was never properly recorded, and that the bank's actions were not only unethical but illegal." A murmur of surprise spread. Hale's smirk vanished, replaced by a tense, frozen expression. This was not the meek man he had expected. "I may not have a law degree," Derek concluded, his voice unwavering, "but I have the truth and today I will prove it." The courtroom fell silent. The judge leaned forward, his casual tapping ceasing. What began as a routine case was now a high-stakes battle of resilience against a system that had misjudged its opponent. They were about to witness a reckoning. Unraveling the deception as Derek presented his case, a hush fell over the courtroom. This was no longer a simple dispute. Judge Carmichael's smirk was gone, replaced by a serious, guarded expression. "Mr. Langston, you may proceed." Derek's voice was firm. "I will show that this foreclosure was based on incomplete records and signatures that do not match verified legal documents." The room buzzed as Hale, visibly shaken, watched with narrowed eyes. Derek held up 2 documents. "These are 2 versions of the mortgage contract. One is the original, the other a supposed modification made 3 months later. The signatures, Your Honor, are fundamentally different." He continued, "And I have evidence to prove why. During the time of the second signature, my grandmother was hospitalized after a debilitating stroke and couldn't have signed anything." Gasps echoed through the room. Derek then produced a notarized affidavit from her physician confirming the hospitalization. Hale, now on his feet, shouted, "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Mr. Hale, you'll have your time," the judge said, his voice sharp. "Sit down." Derek pressed on. "The deeper I looked, the more discrepancies I found. The mortgage ownership was transferred without proper endorsements. The bank pursuing this foreclosure had no legal standing." The judge's brow furrowed. "I'd like to call a witness," Derek announced, his words landing with the force of a gavel. "I have located Linda Myers, the notary who allegedly certified the second mortgage modification." A ripple of shock went through the room. Hale's face went pale. When Linda Myers took the stand, she was visibly nervous but resolute. She admitted she was handed the document by a bank representative and was told it had already been signed. "I was told it was routine," she said, her voice shaking. "Your Honor," Derek said, turning to the judge. "This testimony proves the foreclosure was initiated on a fraudulent basis. I request full discovery of all records and the immediate suspension of the foreclosure order." The judge's decision was swift and decisive. "Request for full discovery is granted. The foreclosure order is suspended." It was a pivotal moment, a crack in the fortress. The man they had dismissed was, in fact, the one with all the cards. A movement begins the day after his initial victory. Derek sat in his grandmother's kitchen. The documents from the full discovery spread before him. The small win was just the beginning. The truth he was uncovering was far more sinister. As he cross-referenced names and dates, a horrifying pattern emerged. This wasn't an isolated incident. The bank had a systematic scheme of fabricated paperwork, targeting vulnerable homeowners. This was a silent theft, a web of deceit spanning years. Fueled not just by his personal fight but by the faces of all those families, Derek reached out to a local investigative journalist, Vanessa Cole. In a quiet library, he laid out his evidence. "It's not just about one bank cutting corners," he explained, his voice tense with controlled anger. "It's a systemic strategy, profiting from the vulnerability of people who can't fight back." Vanessa's stories began to appear online, each one peeling back a new layer of the bank's facade. Messages from other families started to flood Derek's phone. The momentum was building. He arranged a meeting with Christopher Hale under the guise of a settlement discussion. Hale's arrogance was strained. "You think you've made some big discovery?" he sneered. "You're just a man with some papers and a lot of noise." Derek's response was calm. "No, Mr. Hale. I am a man with the truth. And soon you'll have to answer to more than just me." He laid out notarized statements, internal bank emails showing deliberate obfuscation, and damning recordings from whistleblowers. Hale's face went white as the scope of Derek's evidence became clear. "You're bluffing," he said weakly. "Am I?" Derek replied, his voice like ice. "I'll see you in court, Mr. Hale. And this time you won't be smirking." The reckoning on the day Derek returned to the courthouse, the atmosphere was different. The silence was now one of anticipation, not dismissal. The benches were filled with journalists and community members, the very people who had been wronged. They were here to witness justice. Judge Walter Grayson, who now presided over the case, was guarded but watchful. He had read the affidavits and knew this was no longer a simple property dispute. It was a test of justice itself. Christopher Hale sat opposite Derek, his composure crumbling. His team, once confident, now looked like they were holding brittle shields. Derek rose to speak, his voice clear and resonant. "Your Honor, today is not about a single family's home. It is about a pattern of deception and a deliberate scheme to exploit the powerless. Beyond the paperwork are the voices of those who were silenced. He gestured to the gallery where several families stood, a powerful living indictment of the bank's actions. Hale's lawyer tried to object, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, but Derek quickly produced a document, a complete chain of communications signed by Hale himself, outlining instructions to obscure transfer records. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Derek continued, detailing sworn statements from former employees and recorded interviews that proved the scheme. Judge Grayson's voice cut through the room, low and decisive. This is no longer a question of legal technicalities, but of ethics and justice. I am authorizing a full investigation and suspending all foreclosure proceedings tied to these fraudulent actions. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp of relief. As Derek stood there, surrounded by the quiet dignity of those he represented, he felt a deeper sense of resolve. This wasn't the end, it was a turning point. Hale sat motionless, a symbol of a system that had thrived on silence and was now being exposed. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. A woman approached Derek, her voice soft with gratitude. "Thank you for standing up for us," she said. Derek smiled gently. "This is just the beginning," he replied. "But together we'll make sure it's a beginning that counts." The wind of change was in the air and Derek was ready to stand in its path. A legacy of hope, the courtroom's reverberations echoed far beyond its walls. Yet amidst the whirlwind, Derek was drawn back to the quiet peace of his grandmother's home. The peeling paint and worn porch felt like battle scars, a reminder of the hard-won victory. Inside, his grandmother Alma watched him, her eyes filled with pride. "You didn't just fight for me," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "You fought for everyone who's been told they don't matter." Derek channeled his triumph into action, organizing community meetings where families shared their stories. These small gatherings grew, their voices uniting against a shared injustice. He formed a coalition with local lawyers and activists, creating workshops to teach residents how to protect their homes and understand property law. His personal story became a blueprint for others. As he became a recognized figure, Derek's speeches resonated far beyond his community. He spoke not just of his legal victory, but of the emotional toll of the fight and the power of perseverance. One morning, at a packed university auditorium, he looked out at the crowd of students and community leaders. "It's about standing up when the odds are against you," he said. "It's about knowing that the law can be a tool for justice if we are willing to learn it, challenge it, and use it." A young woman approached him afterward. "Your story gave me hope," she said, her hands trembling. Derek took her notebook. "Your voice matters," he said softly. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As the seasons changed, Derek's work continued. The coalition grew stronger, their advocacy more impactful. He was no longer just a man who stood alone. He was a leader of a movement, a symbol of what could be achieved when courage met preparation. Each day he would sit on his grandmother's porch, watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. He knew the fight was not over, but he had proven to the world that the underestimated could not only rise but also lead. This was a new chapter, and this time he was writing it on his own terms. The power of an underestimated voice. Derek Langston's story is a powerful reminder of how one person's determination can ignite a movement. What began as a fight for his grandmother's home evolved into a broader crusade for justice and community empowerment. Derek stood firm against a system that was built to silence him, and through meticulous research and unwavering resolve, he exposed a web of legal fraud. His victory was not just a legal triumph but a testament to the fact that justice can prevail, even when the odds seem insurmountable. His journey teaches us that real change often starts with the most unlikely person standing up and refusing to be dismissed. We don't need a law degree to make a difference. We just need the courage to learn, to challenge, and to speak out for what is right. Derek's story is a beacon of hope and a call to action for all of us. It encourages us to educate ourselves, support those fighting for their rights, and recognize the immense power of community in creating lasting change. If Derek's story inspired you, we invite you to subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that challenge, uplift, and remind us all that the fight for justice is far from over. Together we can keep these conversations alive and work toward a world where every voice is heard and every person has the power to make a difference. Join us. The next chapter is waiting to be written.